The man aimed a nail gun at his own son's forehead.
이거 총이에요?
But the next second, 2 nails popped out of his forehead on their own. The wound even healed completely in the blink of an eye. The father confessed that this was a superpower passed down from their ancestors. It's just that this superpower is extremely money-consuming.
초능력을 쓰면 그만큼 돈이 사라진다. 돈을 가진 만큼 힘이 세진다. 다친 것도 낫고.
Simply put, if Batman had this superpower, Superman would have to kneel down and call him dad. But the problem now is that the person who got this superpower is a total pauper. The father told him to remember to use the superpower to help others. Saving lives costs money too. Would the son really be foolish enough to do that? Without further ado, the story begins. Poor guy Carl and his girlfriend of 9 years went to view an apartment, but no matter how long they looked, it was useless, because the price of the house was completely out of their reach. But how could they feel secure without buying a house? After returning home, his girlfriend Lucy kept calculating the money they had, trying every means to scrape together the down payment first. Since she was a child, she had helped her father manage the accounts at the fried chicken shop. Lucy had an extremely strong grasp of money matters, making sure every penny was spent wisely, thinking that the odds of winning the first home lottery were too low, and getting married could increase those odds a bit. Lucy didn't hesitate to propose marriage. Carl was extremely excited inside. Just then, his phone notification tone rang. It was his father saying he had something important to give him. Thinking it was the cabbage harvest at home, Carl didn't take it seriously. The next day, he took a bus home. His father called him into the warehouse in a mysterious manner. Looking at his detestable father, Carl was reminded of the painful days gone by. In his memory, his father was an extremely prodigal and incompetent man. Not only did he somehow run up huge debts, he even emptied his piggy bank. Poor mother had worked hard all her life. Carl didn't want to talk to him more and directly asked where the thing was. The other party said he would get his pension this month. After saying that, he asked Carl for money. After stuffing the cash into his pocket, he firmly held Carl's hand and told him to take over his mantle. Carl didn't understand what this meant. He tried to break free but was horrified to find how strong the other party was. What was even weirder was that the entire warehouse began to shake violently, but his father's eyes were unusually firm. The moment their eyes met, Carl saw scenes from different eras. It was like watching a movie. The protagonist inside could easily run up walls and kill enemies, and his coins inexplicably scattered from Carl's body. His father let go of his hand. He was confused about what had just happened, only to see his father aim the nail gun at his forehead.
이거 총이에요?
Seeing his son lying motionless on the ground, the father told him he could get up now. Miraculously, the wound on Carl's forehead was healing rapidly. Then he really came to life again. He asked his father what on earth was going on. The other party confessed that the people in their family had superpowers, but it was a hereditary system. The superpower required money to use. The more money, the stronger the power gained. As he spoke, he told his son to open his wallet and take a look. Carl obediently took out his wallet and opened it, only to find it was completely empty. He had not yet accepted the reality. His father said 2 more funny things, telling him to remember to keep the secret and secretly help those in need, and not to covet other people's money. Carl's mind was racing. Helping others was one thing, but emptying his own pockets too. This was nothing short of being a fool. Carl was in dire need of money right now. He would definitely not spend money recklessly. So he told his father to take back the superpower quickly, but the other party said once it was passed on, it couldn't be taken back. It could only be passed on to the next generation when he retired. Carl wanted to know if he could pass it on to a stranger. His father told him to abandon that idea, because the inheritance had to be within the bloodline. After saying that, he also took out a loan shark's business card, telling him he could go borrow money if he needed it. Carl stood there dumbfounded, his mind going blank. His father squatted on the ground, picking up the coins, explaining that every time he used the superpower, he would get a dividend. It used to be that spending 10,001 would make 501 fall out. Recently, less money had been falling out. Clearly the market wasn't doing well. But even a little money was still money, and it would definitely come in handy someday. Carl really couldn't accept this matter. Although his father had told him to keep it a secret, but he and Lucy had no secrets between them, so he told her everything that had just happened in detail. The other party thought this was absurd, accusing him of making up such a ridiculous reason for spending money, just because he didn't want to get married. Seeing that his girlfriend didn't believe him, Carl quickly said he could prove it. He took 10,001 out of his wallet and put it in his pocket. Then Carl showed her his empty pocket. Lucy was shocked and asked if he had secretly learned magic online. Carl insisted that of course he had not. The other party told him to prove it again if he had the guts. Carl held out his hand for money. Lucy reluctantly pulled out another 10,000 won. After getting the money, Carl easily bent the steel pipe. Lucy told him to restore it to its original state. Carl had to chase Lucy for money again, although money was very important to them. But it was necessary to figure out the ins and outs of this. Lucy wanted to know how much power different amounts of money could yield, and whether the power could bring unexpected gains. She asked Carl to cooperate in conducting the test. After a series of tests, they found that the superpower had far too many limitations, and it was simply not cost-effective. For example, cash had to be carried on one's person to gain power. Spending 10,000 won only allowed one to jump 2 meters high. With that money, one could take the elevator several times. Lucy had thought about making money by competing in contests, but after the competition, coins would fall from his body, for fear that others would find out there was something fishy going on. Overall, Carl's superpower was just a useless gimmick. Lucy thought the best choice was not to use the superpower. Now there was only one last housing application project left in the capital region. If they wanted to buy a house, they absolutely couldn't spend money recklessly. After saying that, Lucy left with a bag of coins, leaving Carl sitting alone by the river sighing. What boy didn't have a superhero dream? But why did it have to cost money? He looked at the only 120,000 won he had left on him. To fulfill his superhero dream, he decided to indulge himself one last time. The scenery of the capital was beautiful, but beautiful things cost money. Carl deeply realized, what his father had passed on to him wasn't a superpower, but poverty. The next day, Carl woke up from his sleep. To avoid accidentally triggering the superpower, he carried as little cash on him as possible. He would never run if he could walk. After all, money could disappear in the blink of an eye. When he exited the subway station, Carl saw an elderly man carrying heavy luggage. He instinctively wanted to ask if the old man needed help, but he regretted it as soon as he said it. Thinking of what Lucy had said about not meddling in other people's business, he ultimately held back. The elderly man cast a disdainful glance at him. Carl felt extremely uncomfortable, but he knew clearly that if he wanted to buy a house, he had to be a selfish person. So after entering the company, faced with all the glances of people in need of help, he chose to turn a blind eye to all of them. This made Carl the target of everyone's criticism. His colleagues all gossiped about him behind his back. His supervisor even called him aside for a talk, saying that an elderly man had just filed a complaint, blaming Carl for being unkind as a civil servant. Helping someone didn't cost money, yet he was still so selfish and indifferent. The supervisor asked Carl why he was acting so strangely today. After apologizing, the other party just kept scratching his wrist. The supervisor didn't want to say anything more and told him to go back to work. That night, Carl went home for dinner. Lucy was almost driven crazy by the down payment. She asked if there was any way to get 30 million won. Carl wanted to buy a stock that his supervisor was optimistic about. Lucy knew that blindly following the trend with this kind of thing was easy to lose money, warning him that he wasn't allowed to touch stocks for the rest of his life. With no other way out, Lucy decided to sell the useless things they had. For example, selling one of their 2 tablets. Carl felt like the sky was falling. He really enjoyed surfing the internet while watching movies, but his girlfriend had actually already sold the tablet. Carl wasn't happy about it. The other party had long anticipated this, so she used part of the money from selling the tablet to buy Carl a second-hand game console. After successfully getting the game console, Carl was extremely excited and was about to go home to play the game console. Suddenly, he heard a cry for help from behind. He turned around and saw someone being bullied. He glanced at the remaining money in his hand. Carl was extremely torn inside. This money was meant for buying a house. If 10,000 won could solve the problem, it would be okay. But there were 3 bullies. It would cost at least several 100,000 won to handle them. After a long period of hesitation, he quickly fled the scene. On his way back, he kept brainwashing himself. If he were a wealthy man, he would definitely be a good person. Unfortunately, he was a poor man right now. He ran home with an uneasy heart. Carl quickly handed the money to Lucy, then he rushed into the bathroom to calm himself down. Meanwhile, Lucy counted the money he had brought back, confused about why there was 20,000 won missing. Carl lied, saying he had run home because he was desperate to use the bathroom.
뛰지 말라니까.
미안. 나는 쓰레기다.
Only after composing himself did Carl go out to play games. Thinking about his superpower, Carl felt more and more depressed. Clearly in games, good people get rewarded with money for saving lives. But why did he have to spend money to save people? He He could only take his frustration out on the game, completely unaware that a lot of blisters had appeared on his arm. The next day, Carl met his mother at a cafe as she had asked. He asked her if she wanted some cake. She flatly refused and told him to learn to save money to buy a house. Carl said he knew that. As he spoke, he unconsciously scratched his neck. When his mother saw the blisters on his neck and arm, she cried out in distress, blaming it all on that old codger. He had also had this condition when he was young, never thought it would be passed down to his son. In fact, these blisters only appeared after he got the superpower, and his father had hidden the fact that he had superpowers from his mother for a lifetime. Just as Carl was feeling extremely depressed, his mother said she had brought him a gift. Carl was very scared. He really didn't want to receive anything terrifying again, but his mother was different from his father. She brought over more than 30 million won. This was the life savings his mother had worked so hard for all her life. Knowing that Carl needed money to buy a house, as soon as it matured, she hurried to bring it over to him.
고마워요. 나 진짜 돈 필요했는데.
돈이 항상 필요하지.
Then his mother said she was going abroad for a trip tomorrow. She had never been anywhere far away. She didn't know what had gotten into that old man. He had suddenly said he wanted to take her on a trip. After his mother left, Carl knew that his good days were coming. He and Lucy would finally no longer have to worry about the down payment. Everything would slowly get back on track then. On the way home, Carl walked slowly. He excitedly called Lucy. He was just about to say that they had enough money for the down payment. Suddenly, a loud crash came from behind. Carl turned around following the sound, and witnessed a tragic series of chain collisions. The last bus, which was full of passengers, was stuck on the edge of the bridge, and the bus body was still teetering precariously. Lucy on the other end of the phone asked what was wrong. Carl didn't answer, thinking about what his father had said. Someone always had to do good deeds. And then thinking about his girlfriend's bright smile, his hand holding the money became extremely heavy. In the end, he still couldn't bear to watch multiple lives pass away right in front of him. The next second, Carl rushed forward and grabbed the back of the bus. Along with the crisp sound of coins falling to the ground, the blisters on Carl's body disappeared. He used his superpower to pull the bus. After the crisis was resolved, all the money was gone.
엄마의 평생이 이렇게 사라졌다.
To make matters worse, Carl's superpower was exposed. The scene shifted. A group of thugs were chasing a woman frantically. After being cornered in a dead end, she glanced around and saw there were no surveillance cameras. Instead, the woman showed a meaningful smile. She slowly walked over to the wooden rack beside her. Unexpectedly, the woman also had superpowers. Faced with the thugs charging at her, the woman fought back directly and decisively. After taking care of everyone, she was about to breathe a sigh of relief. Suddenly, someone from behind foolishly tried to strangle her neck. The woman had no choice but to slap a palm print on the man's face. The thug thought there was no way he could fight her now. He struggled to his feet and fled the scene in a hurry. But just then, a luxury car arrived behind them, and a wealthy young lady got out of it. She mocked the woman for really putting on airs just because she had superpowers. The woman wanted to teach that arrogant girl a lesson. Unexpectedly, the young lady had come prepared. She easily neutralized the woman's superpowers with just an artificial rainfall, and she had even brought a fire extinguisher. In the end, she took the woman away in a box without lifting a finger, and the woman who was taken away was named Helen. After she went missing, her good friend Aaron put up missing person posters at the convenience store, wondering where Helen could have gone. Jack beside her was also confused. Helen was extremely powerful in combat. Logically speaking, she shouldn't have been at a disadvantage. Just then, Aaron pulled out a video and showed it to him. This was exactly the video of Carl saving people. Noticing that coins fell from Carl's body, he remembered that there had been people with this ability in their organization before. Then he took out his car keys and told Aaron to drive him to kidnap Carl. But Aaron thought it was unnecessary. With Helen gone now, they would be easily caught if they went out.
이 친구는 달라. 싸움을 끝낼 수 있다고.
On the other side, even though Carl had clearly saved people, he was taken to the detention center and locked up. This was really heartbreaking. To get out as soon as possible, he could only pin his hopes on the business card his father had given him. After calling the loan shark and giving his father's name, the other party quickly bailed him out. The first thing Carl did after getting his phone back was to check if Lucy had called him. When he saw there were 50 missed calls, he knew he was done for. He was about to go home to apologize. Suddenly, someone rushed in and asked where the bus Hero was, Carl was so scared that he tried to run away, but he was stopped by several men dressed strangely. They took Carl to the loan shark boss. The boss was curious why he had called her. Carl really had no other choice, so he sincerely apologized to her. The loan shark boss said this was a good thing. You've heard of sons paying off their father's debts, right? Your father still owes me a debt, with interest included. It's 3 billion won. Carl never thought there would be such a thing. He regretted it so much that he wanted to jump out of the car. At the same time, the young lady's car stopped at the livestock farm. After passing the identity verification, she entered the hidden laboratory. Her subordinates showed her the newly found superpowered person. Seeing how outstanding Carl's performance was, she smiled and said her father would definitely be satisfied. In fact, after learning that there were superpowered people in the world, the Chable family had been working hard to capture them for research. Looking at the essence extracted by the scientists, she wondered if she would gain the corresponding superpowers if she injected this stuff. After saying that, she told her subordinates to take the stuff away. The scientist anxiously said that the clinical trials were not over yet, only to be slapped several times by the young lady. After taking the stuff and leaving, the young lady ordered her subordinates to make Carl even poorer, so poor that he couldn't use his superpowers. Wouldn't it be easier to capture him then? Taking advantage of her good mood now, the young lady thought of something fun again. She glanced at the essence. She hoped her bodyguard could do her a small favor. On the other side, Carl woke up from his coma and found the loan shark boss right in front of him. She even threw a stack of money at him. Then she called over a group of armed underlings to surround him. He asked what was going on. She said she wanted to personally verify Carl's superpower. The underlings understood immediately and attacked at once. Carl felt like he was going to be beaten to death. He used his last bit of strength to touch the stack of money. Some of the wounds on his body healed quickly. Carl clenched the remaining money and stood up. He knew that to win, he had to be extremely careful with his spending, but he was still pinned down and beaten mercilessly. Carl was also shocked by his own explosive power. He had wanted to put on another show of strength, but when he reached into his pocket, he found that all the money was gone. In the end, exhausted, he collapsed to the ground and couldn't get up. The loan shark boss told her underlings to leave first. Then she walked over to Carl and asked how his father was doing lately. Carl replied that he was gone. He had gone to Spain. She quickly bowed her head first.
내 돈 떼먹고 스페인에 놀러 갔다고?
The loan shark boss was filled with deep resentment, wondering why Carl's father never got a divorce. If he had chosen to be with her, he could have easily bought an island in Spain to live on. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. She told Carl to pay back the money as soon as possible. After all, compound interest would only make the debt grow bigger and bigger. If he really couldn't pay it back, there was a second option: marry her precious daughter. As her son-in-law, he wouldn't have to pay back the debt. One of her underlings immediately showed her a photo, revealing that Carl had a girlfriend. She told him to think carefully. With that meager salary, he would never stand a chance against those lunatics out there. Carl was completely dumbfounded. The loan shark boss knew that this kid had no idea about the existence of the Chables, but Carl thought the lunatics she was referring to were her underlings. He felt around and found a 50,001 bill in his pocket. He decided to take a gamble and escape by jumping out of the third-floor window. The underlings tried to chase him, but the loan shark boss said it wasn't necessary. When this kid ran out of money, he'd come back on his own. Not long after, Carl ran home and found Lucy sitting silently on the bed. He asked her if she had been waiting this whole time. Lucy pulled out the trending video and demanded to know where he had gotten the money. Carl told her the truth. Deeply disappointed, she grabbed her things and rushed out of the house. Carl panicked and chased after her, but she got into a taxi far too quickly. He quickly called Lucy to explain, but a sudden explosion rang out behind him. Carl turned around and saw their rental apartment engulfed in flames, and not far away, there was someone staring right at him. At this moment, he finally realized what the loan shark boss had meant by those lunatics. Penniless, he had to flee the scene in a hurry. He didn't dare stop for a moment until he hid in a warehouse and finally caught his breath. The scene shifted. Lucy noticed that Carl had been blowing up her phone with texts and calls. Still furious, she didn't want to answer. She composed herself and went to her friend's wedding. But she had barely sat down, a violent explosion rocked the wedding hall. Chaos erupted at once. On the other side, Carl woke up from his sleep. He checked his phone and saw a news report saying a hotel had caught fire that morning. The fire was still raging. Remembering that Lucy had mentioned attending a wedding, he quickly called her to check if she was okay. but no one answered. Realizing Lucy might be in danger, he rushed to the bank in a panic. In fact, the night before, he had found a letter his father had left behind. His father had written that he too had struggled and hesitated countless times. When he was young, he had also wanted to live an ordinary life, but there had just been far too many emergencies. He had tried putting himself in others' shoes. If his wife and child were caught in a disaster, and died because no one had saved them, how devastated would he be? That was why he had eventually come to understand, and Carl also had someone he needed to protect. No matter how important money was, it paled in comparison to his beloved Lucy. Once he got the money, he immediately used his superpower to rush to the hotel. At this moment, Lucy was trapped in the fire and couldn't escape. The ceiling was about to collapse and crush her. Her legs refused to move at all. When the heavy debris crashed to the ground, the others screamed Lucy's name in despair. Lucy was too shocked to speak. Carl lifted the debris, slowly stood up, and threw it aside with all his strength. Then he hugged the terrified Lucy tightly. She looked at the money in his pocket and asked where he had gotten it this time. Carl said he had withdrawn all their money for the house. Then he smashed his fists against the wall relentlessly, creating an escape route for everyone. At Thai's moment, Lucy thought Carl was glowing. After making sure all the trapped people had escaped, Carl walked up to Lucy and pulled out a marriage application form. He swore he would work harder than ever to make money. They would definitely have a house someday, no matter what. He didn't want to lose Lucy. She was deeply moved. But in this warm and happy moment, the young lady just had to ruin everything. Her bodyguard had stolen Helen's firepower, and charged in carrying 2 gas canisters.
내 월급으로 감당 안 되는 놈.
But Carl knew he had to fight. He grabbed the little money he had left and grappled with the enemy. But that small amount of money was nowhere near enough. Watching Carl get beaten up, Lucy was so angry that she attacked the bodyguard with a stone. The bodyguard immediately turned his attention to her and slowly advanced toward her. Lucy was confused about how he had suddenly gotten money again, but when she glanced at her friend's wedding gift box, she had her answer. It was completely empty. Badly injured, Carl collapsed to the ground, unable to move. Lucy begged him to hold on. Just then, the wall twisted violently, then 2 people wearing oxygen masks emerged from it. It was Aaron and Jack. After asking how Carl's father was doing lately, Jack placed a stack of bills in Carl's hand. Later, Carl was taken to Jack's place. When he woke up, Jack told him about the members of their association. Aaron's superpower was moving objects with her mind, but she needed to eat bread to recharge her energy. And Jack needed to drink alcohol. Once he drank, he could walk through walls at will. He said he had something to show Carl. They went to a cluttered warehouse. Aaron used her telekinesis to move the items aside, revealing a door hidden in the wall. Jack gestured for Carl to go inside. He said their association's enemy was called the Mortal Society.
평범한 사람들이 모여서 초능력자를 사냥하지.
The members of the Mortal Society had no superpowers, but they had all the money and power in the world. Worse still, Carl was their next target. On the other side, in a VIP hospital room, a man slowly sat down beside his dying father.
아버지를 이렇게 만든 놈을 찾았습니다. 그놈 초능력을 가질 수 있어요.
With those words, the man pulled out his father's oxygen tube without hesitation. What on earth was going on here? At the same time, to prepare for the upcoming challenges, Carl had to train with Aaron to improve his overall abilities. He had thought it would be some advanced training method, but it turned out to be just moving cargo. After a long, hard day, Jack told him to spar with him and even allowed him to use his superpower, but Carl's combat skills were far too poor. Realizing his lack of ability, in the days that followed, Carl went to work at his company during the day, and spent all his free time training with Aaron and Jack. As for why the young lady hadn't come to cause trouble, Jack thought it was because she hadn't found the right opportunity to strike. No matter how rich and powerful she was, she wouldn't dare cause a scene in broad daylight. A few days later, Jack planned to destroy the research data in the Chables laboratory. He said he would need Carl's help to take care of the bodyguards. As the 2 of them were talking, Aaron brought over a gift. Carl excitedly opened the bag, and found a pair of underwear covered in pockets. Aaron said the underwear could hold coins, so he wouldn't have to kneel on the ground picking them up one by one.
9년 사귄 여친한테도 못 받아본 속옷 선물을 받았다.
On top of that, Aaron also gave him a mask, telling him to cover his face next time he went into action. That night, Carl saw some thugs harassing a woman. He immediately put on the mask and stepped in. He pulled out a bill right in front of the thugs. The thugs thought he was backing down, but Carl stuffed the money into his underwear pocket, then he threw a flurry of punches and quickly took care of the thugs, and the lone shark boss watched everything from afar. Late at night, Lucy told Carl some good news. They had won the housing lottery, using their newlywed status to apply had paid off. Carl was overjoyed. He was a married man now, but Lucy told him not to celebrate too soon. The down payment was 60 million won, but she had scraped together almost all of it by asking her parents for help and pooling their savings, and the mortgage wouldn't be a problem either, because a company was willing to hire her at double her current salary. She was going to the interview soon. The next day, Carl went to meet the oldest superpowered person in the association. This person could see the future. After activating his superpower, he rambled on with a lot of incomprehensible words, then he lost all memory of what he had just said. That was the price he had to pay. To see the future, he had to forget the past. Everything was going fine at first. Suddenly, the old man told Erin to come into the room. She had no idea why. Thanks to Carl's quick reflexes, he saved the person just in time. At this moment, the Chables men charged toward them. Jack told Carl to take some loose change and run. No matter what, he must not let the Chable get their hands on Carl's powers. After taking a sip of alcohol, Jack charged out, but Carl could tell he was forcing himself. He wanted to help, but he didn't have enough money on him. Having run out of options, he contacted the loan shark boss and asked her if all the earlier buildup meant she didn't actually want money at all. No matter what her motive was, as long as she lent him a bit more money, he would agree to anything. After hanging up the phone, the loan shark boss checked Lucy's job interview documents. She smiled and said her future son-in-law had just called her, and by that time, Jack and the others were already surrounded. The young lady laughed at how naive they were, thinking she really wouldn't dare act in broad daylight. She was reveling in her triumph when, suddenly, the old man said that he had finally seen her in person. Without giving her any time to react, the old man began to see the future. Then the old man added that the young lady wasn't long for this world. The young lady lost her composure instantly and pulled out a gun. The bullet flew straight toward the old man, but he was completely unharmed. Because Carl had already gotten the money, he sighed that the pockets on the underwear Erin gave him weren't big enough. After all, he was a rich man now. The young lady looked at him and smiled. When minds don't meet, a single word is too many. The two sides immediately engaged in a fierce battle. Listening to the sound of money being spent, the young lady watched with great relish, gloating that she had made the right choice to bring extra men that day. The young lady admitted she was a little flustered, but she still had an ace up her sleeve. After taking the defeated bodyguard back last time, she had ordered someone to inject a vial of essence into him. The bodyguard had regained the ability to control fire. Carl knew talking was useless, so he charged forward and grappled with the bodyguard. Carl glanced at the money in his pocket, knowing that if he kept fighting, he would be caught sooner or later, so he picked up the bodyguard and flew out with him. Then he walked into the water without hesitation. The other party was also not smart, yet they decisively followed and went into the water. But the problem was that the bodyguard was actually quite powerful. Once the money ran out, Carl was completely defenseless. The young lady who had chased after him smiled triumphantly. Little did she know that the pool Carl had chosen was a wishing well. He grabbed a handful of coins and stood up. With one powerful blow, he sent the bodyguard flying several meters away.
저 정도였어요?
돈은 한계가 없으니까.
Just then, the young lady said she had a phone call for Carl. The caller was the man who had pulled the plug on his father in the hospital. He was the young lady's father, Jason. Jason said he was a businessman, and was willing to buy Carl's superpowers for cash. He told Carl to name any price he wanted. Carl didn't know how to respond. Jason gave him time to think, and agreed to a truce until Carl made his decision. The scene shifted. Carl went home and confronted his father, asking why he had said superpowers couldn't be sold when they clearly could. His father said those people were ruthless and deceitful, they couldn't be trusted. He wanted to know what his son would choose. Carl said he would think it over carefully. After returning to the city, Carl couldn't stop thinking about it. He realized the young lady was indeed a lunatic, and her father was probably even scarier than her. Maybe they really couldn't be trusted. He might end up losing both his life and his superpowers, so he was really struggling to make a decision. After thinking it over, he wanted to ask Erin for some advice, because his girlfriend didn't know anything about this. The lone shark boss only talked about money. Jack would definitely chew him out. He had no one else to turn to but Erin. wanting to know if superpowers could really be sold. Aaron was clearly stunned by the question too. In fact, Helen had mentioned this before as well, and she had admitted that Jack had known all along but had kept it a secret. Later, Helen's powers really were taken away from her. Aaron wanted to find out what was going on, so she and Carl secretly opened Jack's safe. They found a list of missing superpowered people inside, and were dumbfounded, because every single person on that list had sold their superpowers. Helen's powers had been worth 80 million won.
죽은 줄 알았어. 겨우 여기서 벗어났는데. 나라도 안 했을 거야.
The most shocking part was, because Carl's father had almost destroyed the mortal society back in the day, his superpowers were the most valuable of all, worth a whopping 1.3 billion won. But was this really the truth? On the other side, Jack sat alone in his car, drinking his sorrows away. He held a medical diagnosis that said he had late-stage liver cancer. The doctors had told him to stop drinking immediately. Without alcohol, he was just an ordinary person, but even if he stopped drinking, he didn't have much time left to live anyway. At the same time, the young lady was having dinner with her father. She didn't understand why they had to buy the superpowers, when they could just take them by force. Jason said everything had its limits, except for one thing.
세상에는 돈이 흘러넘친다. 그놈 힘도 무한하다는 얘기지.
Jason thought there was no need to get on bad terms with Carl. After all, Carl's father had almost wiped them out once before. The young lady swore she wouldn't fail again, but Jason cut her off and said her younger brother would be coming back from America soon. Then he ordered the servants to serve the food. Staring at the empty plates, the young lady stormed off to her room in a rage. Jason kept eating calmly. After finishing his meal, he called Carl. Carl said he was willing to sell his superpowers.
40억 165만 원이야.
Jason agreed readily, thinking he was about to become a millionaire. Carl immediately took Lucy out for fun. He also gave her the diamond ring he had owed her for so long. The next day, the police found something suspicious about Carl during their investigation, so they went straight to his office to find him. Carl panicked and stole a car to escape. On the way, he asked Jason if they could move up the time of the deal. Then he arrived at the livestock company, but Jack showed up to stop him. The two men were about to fight when they saw Aaron arrive as well. She resented Jack for lying to her. She lifted a utility pole with her mind and smashed it toward him. Then the three of them got into a fierce free-for-all. Jack fought with all his might to stop Carl. At the same time, the loan shark boss received word that Carl was going to the laboratory to sell his superpowers. She ordered her men to stop Carl by any means necessary. By this point, Jack and Aaron were already out of commission, because they had run out of alcohol and bread, and Carl only had 10,001 left. He refused to give up his chance to get rich overnight. Even though the loan shark's men attacked, they still couldn't stop him. After entering the laboratory, Carl glanced at his money bag, then he climbed onto the operating table, completely unaware that Jack had aimed a gun right at him. Before he could make a move, the Chables' daughter called her father. She excitedly said they had already caught Carl. Upon hearing this, Carl realized he had been tricked. Jason had never been sincere about the deal at all. Once his superpowers fell into their hands, Carl would be killed, but right now, he was nothing more than a helpless lamb waiting to be slaughtered.
작업 끝나면 그냥 죽여버려.
Watching as the extraction device drew closer and closer to him, Carl called out to the young lady, shouting that he was a man with a conscience. How could he really sell something he had inherited from his parents? The young lady was clearly flustered. Just then, Jack lowered his gun and signaled Aaron, who was waiting outside, to make her move. Upon receiving the signal, Aaron quickly used her telekinesis to create chaos. The next second, the laboratory was plunged into complete darkness. Carl fumbled around in the dark and grabbed a banknote. He immediately activated his superpowers and broke free from his restraints. By the dim red light, the young lady screamed furiously, ordering her men to kill him. But Carl, with money in hand, was fearless. He took care of all the enemies efficiently and decisively. In fact, this trip to the laboratory had been planned by him, Jack, and Aaron long ago. They had been looking for a chance to break into the laboratory to search for information, but the Chables men had been keeping a close eye on them. At all times, they hadn't had a single chance to make a move. Just when they were at their wits' end, Jason had offered to buy Carl's superpowers. This had been the perfect opportunity, so the three of them had staged this whole act. At this point, Carl had already met up with Jack. With the help of his superpowers, he opened the safe, and successfully obtained the information they were looking for. But before they could even look at it, footsteps could be heard outside. Jack had to quickly splash alcohol all over the laboratory, trying his best to completely destroy everything. watching as the laboratory was engulfed in roaring flames. Jack and Carl smiled triumphantly, but it wasn't long before a group of well-equipped mercenaries arrived. The two of them fled in panic. In the chaos, the bag of money got stuck in the door. Carl had been counting on that money to hold his engagement banquet, but the money bag ended up being trapped on the other side of the door. To make matters worse, Carl's superpowers required burning money, and Jack needed to drink alcohol. Without money or alcohol, they were nothing but ordinary people. Faced with the mercenaries approaching them head-on, the two of them had to jump out the window and run, only to find that there were mercenaries here as well. They thought they were going to die here today. Aaron came to their rescue just in the nick of time, after escaping from the livestock company safely. Carl's mental state was very abnormal, he sighed, saying that it had been 4 billion won. How could he have let it slip through his fingers? But at least they had gotten the information. By going through the information, they discovered that the Chables seemed to be hatching a major conspiracy, capturing superpowered individuals to extract superpower essence, and combining it with the addictive properties of a certain substance, to create a totally new business model. They were wondering exactly what the Chable family planned to do. Suddenly, Jack pulled out a letter. It praised Carl for being a hero, and the letter was written by someone named Joe Nason. This man was none other than the young lady's biological younger brother. On the other side, Joe Nason arrived at the dilapidated laboratory. He joked that the young lady was definitely finished this time. He was wondering how their father would punish his sister. A woman walked over excitedly, asking him how it felt to be released. Joe Nason replied that it wasn't too bad. He wanted to see the essence, but was told that Jason had already moved all of it away. Joe Nason smiled and said it didn't matter.
준비는
다 해놨지.
What on earth did this mean? At the same time, Carl and the other two sneaked into the civil servant office building. After stealing Joe Nason's information from inside, the three of them went to the address listed in the file. Jack immediately drank alcohol to activate his superpowers. After entering the house and searching around, he said confusedly that there was no one inside at all, but there were clearly signs of someone living there. They searched around inside the house, and when they spotted a suspicious telescope, they leaned in to look through it, only to see that the rooftop opposite was covered with people. All of these people were dead, lying around Joe Nason. Carl was completely shocked by what he saw. This was clearly a deliberate show of force meant to intimidate them. They had thought the young lady was crazy and vicious enough, but they never imagined that Joe Nason was even more terrifying than her. In the early hours of the morning, Carl went back home. He saw that his wife Lucy had fallen asleep waiting for him. He gently covered her with a blanket, then he walked over to the meal that Lucy had prepared for him. As he ate, a question popped into his mind. How exactly did the superheroes in movies balance their family, work, and doing good deeds? The next day, Carl was called into his supervisor's office for a talk. His supervisor demanded to know why the police had come looking for him, and why he had stolen a car and fled. Carl explained that it was just a small misunderstanding, but his supervisor didn't want to listen to his excuses, so he punished Carl by cutting his salary for 3 months. Thinking about the heavy mortgage he still had to pay, Carl was utterly dejected. After work, he went to the police station to give a statement. Jack, who was a lawyer, was there to help him. Everything was going smoothly at first, but when Detective Aaron walked in, the atmosphere in the interrogation room instantly turned tense. Aaron threatened Carl, telling him to stay out of trouble and not to misuse his powers, or he would definitely end up in jail. Then he told them they could leave. Carl didn't understand how Aaron knew about his superpowers. Aaron replied that the guy was also part of the association.
근데 무슨 초능력? 시비 거는 거.
Carl could tell Jack was very dissatisfied with Aaron. There must have been some bad blood between them. Carl wanted to ask for details, but Jack left without even looking back. On the other side, Joe Nason went back home. The young lady glared at him with hatred. She snarled angrily that she should have killed him when they were kids. These words brought back painful memories for Joe Nason, because his sister had actually tried to kill him back then. Luckily, the bullet had only grazed his ear in the end. They were bickering when Jason suddenly arrived. He asked what had happened with the mass deaths. Joe Nason said he had drugged those people.
대규모 임상시험이라고 보시면 돼요.
It was clear that this incident was linked to the Chable family's conspiracy. The young lady thought this would attract unwanted attention, and would most likely ruin everything. But Jason actually admired his son's ruthlessness, and handed over full control of the laboratory to Joe Nason. This infuriated the young lady to no end. At the same time, Jack and the others found out about the Chables conspiracy. Through their investigation, they had been replicating the superpower essence to mass-produce it and sell it on the market. The drug was mixed with narcotics, which greatly increased customer retention. But according to their clinical trial data, the drug sometimes caused horrific side effects. The association had to step in and stop it. But the problem was that the operation was scheduled for the same day as Carl's engagement visit. He had to hurry up and get the job done, and rush to the banquet as quickly as possible. But would everything go smoothly? That night, Jack stood guard outside the nightclub, where the drug deal was taking place. Meanwhile, Carl and Aaron had already taken the elevator upstairs. From the information they had, they only knew that the drug seller carried a red Hermes bag, so Carl immediately started searching the crowd. But all the women's bags looked so similar. Plus, it was hard to tell the colors under the nightclub lights. Carl grew frustrated and anxious. Unexpectedly, a miracle happened. The red Hermes bag suddenly appeared not far away. He didn't realize at all that this was a trap set up by Joe Nason on purpose. He chased after it without hesitation. When he reached the spot, he was certain that the woman with the Hermes bag was their target. Seeing Carl approach, the Hermes woman didn't panic at all. She even used her teleportation superpower to lock the door behind her. Carl tried to recruit her to their side, but this was nothing more than wishful thinking. The Hermes woman immediately snatched his wallet. Seeing that it only contained a meager few thousand won, she mocked him for being so poor. Carl replied helplessly that he had recently taken a pay cut. The Hermes woman didn't want to waste any more time. She suddenly pulled out a knife and slashed Carl's expensive suit. This was the suit he had specially picked out to meet his future father-in-law. Carl was so angry that he was determined to get revenge. Carl swung at her repeatedly but couldn't land a single hit. What's more, his suit was now torn to shreds. He knew that mindless fighting wouldn't work. He listened carefully with his ears, and surprisingly, he managed to land a counterattack. The Hermes woman didn't linger. She used her superpower to leave the room quickly. Carl didn't chase after her. Instead, he grabbed her stash of drugs and prepared to leave. At this point, the Hermes woman walked over to Joe Nason. She said she thought she could take Carl down, so why didn't he let her capture him? Joe Nason smiled and replied that it wouldn't be fun then. As soon as he finished speaking, the nightclub lights suddenly changed. The confused crowd turned to look at the big screen. They learned that the drug would be given out for free that night, and that the stash was in the red Hermes bag. Realizing this was a rare opportunity, the crowd swarmed toward Carl, shouting at him to hand over the goods quickly. Carl didn't want to hurt ordinary people. Besides, his wallet had already been stolen. He had to cling tightly to the bag. Aaron, who had been pushed aside, saw that the situation was getting worse and worse. She used her telekinesis to lift objects into the air. Carl fought desperately to protect the drug, because he knew that, if ordinary people got their hands on this stuff, it would cost them their lives. He didn't want any more people to die, but he was completely exhausted, and Aaron had fallen into a coma due to a severe head injury. The young lady was dissatisfied with her brother's arrogant behavior. She broke into the laboratory with her bodyguards. She had intended to steal the original superpower essence, but found the container was already empty. She thought Joe Nason was behind it. The young lady ordered her bodyguards to track him down. On the other side, Carl had been knocked unconscious by the crowd at the nightclub. Everyone scrambled wildly for the replicated drug. It was about to be completely snatched away. In the nick of time, the police arrived at the scene. The guilty crowd scattered and fled in panic. Taking advantage of the chaos, Jack walked through the wall and entered the nightclub. To prevent Carl and Aaron from being taken away by the police, he put on his cloak and went to the two, who had woken up by then, and escaped just before Aaron could charge over. After escaping successfully, Carl was about to rush to his engagement visit. Jack panicked and quickly called him back. Then he pulled all the money he had out of his pocket, telling Carl to use his superpower to hurry to meet his fiance's parents. At this time, Lucy and both sets of parents were already getting anxious from waiting. When they heard footsteps, they thought it was Carl, but it was Aaron who showed up. He called Lucy outside to talk, wanting to know where Carl was. Lucy knew exactly what he was up to, but she had no choice but to play dumb. But the policeman refused to let it go. Lucy couldn't take it anymore. She complained that the police weren't out there arresting real criminals. Instead of wasting time here trying to catch Carl,
지돈 써가면서 사람들 구하고 수당 받고도 못 잡는 당신들보다 훨씬 낫네. 근데 왜 좋은 일 하는 사람을 잡아요?
On the other side, Aaron and the others had returned to their hideout. They wondered who had called the police. Suddenly, a familiar voice came out of the darkness. When they stood up to look, They were shocked to see it was the young lady. She said she was a diligent tipster. Aaron didn't buy her lies, and used her telekinesis to aim weapons at her, but the bodyguards aimed their guns at Aaron's head. Aaron knew they stood no chance in a fight, so she had to drop the weapons. At this point, Carl was still taken back to the police station. Aaron thought Carl would only make everything more chaotic. After Carl was detained, Joe Nason arrived. He said everything was going according to his plan. Everything, the bus that almost fell off the bridge, the documents in the safe, had been arranged by him. Everything Carl had been through was part of his scheme. As he spoke, he mentioned Lucy.
너 민숙이 건드리면 진짜 죽는다.
But Joe Nason wasn't one to follow orders. The next day, Joe Nason's men followed Lucy brazenly. Carl knew his wife might be in danger, and wanted to find a chance to escape, so he had to make his move while being transported to court. Luckily, they happened to pass a road under construction along the way. Carl took the opportunity to resist, but was quickly subdued. But some of the officers were the young lady's men. One of them handed him a banknote, and told him to hold his breath quickly. The next second, the police van was hit and crashed into the water. Carl hastily used his superpower to break out of the van. On the other side, Lucy was cornered in a dead end. She knew Carl was stuck at the police station, and couldn't make it, so she had to turn to the loan shark boss for help. The loan shark's men arrived surprisingly quickly. The trouble was resolved right after she hung up the phone. It was clear they had anticipated that Lucy would be in danger. At the same time, Carl struggled to swim to the shore. As soon as he got out of the water, he saw the young lady waving at him, and Jack and the others were there too. Something about this scenario felt completely off. Carl told Jack to explain. Jack replied helplessly that they had somehow ended up teaming up.
전 저 여자 못 믿어요.
난 못 믿어도 조나단에 대한 내 증언은 믿어도 돼.
The young lady said she would take care of the police, and get them to stop hunting Carl. In exchange, they had to help her get rid of Joe Nason. Carl asked how they were supposed to do that. The young lady showed them information about Kim Hae Savings Bank. She said the original superpower essence had been moved there. She didn't want that drug to hit the market, because she would be completely cast aside if it did, and the world would fall into chaos, so their goals were the same. The young lady also said that everyone at Kim Hae Bank was a member of the Mortal Society. These people were guarding the secret vault tightly. She could provide the key to the private vault on the first basement floor. Once they got there, they would find the secret vault further inside. The vault door only recognized Jason's biometrics, but this shouldn't be a problem for Carl and the others. After the young lady left, Carl and the others held a private meeting. The three of them knew full well that the young lady was using them, but mutual exploitation could be a good deal. Plus, Jack had figured out that Kim Hae Bank was the Mortal Society's lair. They had been preparing to seize Carl's superpowers all along, so they must have stockpiled a huge amount of money there. If they could get their hands on that money, they could wipe out the Mortal Society completely. And Lucy had overheard their whole conversation. She called Carl outside, hoping he wouldn't walk into the lion's den. If they couldn't find the vault, Carl would end up in a terrible situation. It was far too dangerous. As she spoke, Lucy pulled out the loan shark's debt collection notice. Carl asked her why she had it. She replied that she worked there. Now that she thought about it, they must have been set up from the start. Both the loan shark and the association wanted Carl to step up and take down the Mortal Society. Lucy didn't want Carl to risk his life, but Carl had already made up his mind. He was the only one who could do this. He wanted to let everyone live a normal, peaceful life. Lucy was convinced. She asked Carl how much money he needed. Then she went to the loan shark to ask for the money. The loan shark boss wanted to know the reason.
처음부터 상웅이 여기 보낼 생각이셨죠. 그래서 상웅이한테 접근하신 거죠.
Lucy was very resolute, saying that if the loan shark didn't give her enough money, she would never let Carl go there. Lucy had hit the nail on the head. The loan shark had to agree to hand over the money. On the other side, the Mortal Society's management held a meeting. Everyone was talking heatedly about the recent drug incident, blaming Joe Nason for making the situation far too big. The police would definitely come after them.
근본도 없는 게 갑자기 들어와서 지금 뭐 하는?
아, 시끄러.
The next day, Lucy handed the 30 million won she'd gotten to Carl. She also said that after everything was over, she had some interesting news to share. Carl said an affectionate goodbye to her. Then he went to Kim Hae Savings Bank with Aaron and Jack. Looking at the dilapidated bank, Carl wondered if this really was the Mortal Society's headquarters. Jack told him not to let his guard down. The exterior was just run down. The security system inside was state-of-the-art. As the three of them talked, the young lady was watching not far away. She called her bodyguards on the phone, telling them that if Carl and the others came out with the essence, they were to capture them at any cost. then take them to Jason to claim credit. If Joe Nason gained the upper hand in the fight, they had to step in immediately to capture Carl. In any case, the credit had to be hers. A few seconds later, Jack took the key and entered the vault, while Carl and Aaron waited outside. As soon as Jack reached his destination, Carl voluntarily revealed his identity. The bank immediately activated its security system and locked all the doors tight. The young lady outside was furious, because according to the plan, the three of them shouldn't have revealed themselves so early. She panicked and ordered her men to rush to the back door. At this point, over a dozen guns were pointed at Carl's head. Faced with the fierce hail of gunfire, Carl reluctantly pulled out the money Lucy had given him. Upon learning that Jack had entered the secret vault, he quickly activated his superpowers and counterattacked. His moves were now crisp and decisive, and he wielded his superpowers with remarkable skill. But 30 million won wouldn't last long. Carl asked Aaron when she could come to help. She replied that she couldn't for the time being. After speaking, Aaron used her telekinesis to open the back door, deliberately letting the young lady's men into the bank. She did this to get the young lady to hold off the mortal society. That way, they would have time to go help in the vault. After confirming that the two groups were fighting fiercely, Carl smashed the floor to pieces with his fists. After taking Aaron underground, he was shocked to find Jack lying on the floor. The reason was that the Hermes woman had stolen his alcohol. At this point, Joe Nason appeared. He knew Carl didn't have much money left, and Aaron was running low on calories too. Joe Nason persuaded them to surrender without a fight, but things had already come this far. How could Carl and the other two give up so easily? With Aaron distracting the weapons with her powers, Carl prepared to use his remaining money to take down Joe Nason. He was almost there when, suddenly, Jack rushed out and pushed him through the other side of the wall. It turned out that Jack had guessed the Hermes woman might steal his alcohol, so he had hidden a sip in his fountain pen beforehand. But even this wasn't part of the plan. Carl thought Jack had done this to let him escape. As he shouted loudly, he smelled a strong stench of money. He turned around and realized the whole room was filled with cash. At the same time, the captured Jack burst out laughing. Aaron asked if he had lost his mind, laughing when he was about to die. Jack said he had studied the vault's blueprint. He thought the space they were in shouldn't be this small, so there must be something behind the wall. As soon as he finished speaking, a gun appeared in front of him. Everyone looked in the direction of the explosion, and saw Carl walking slowly out of the pile of money. Even he sighed that a person's confidence really did come from money. He walked forward and unlocked the chains binding Jack and Aaron, then he stepped unhesitatingly to the front. Looking at the money in the vault, Joe Nason was stunned. He smiled, and said Jason's power really exceeded all expectations. Carl didn't want to waste words. He told Jack to go wait outside first, saying he would finish things up quickly. Jack didn't stand on ceremony either. He took Aaron and left without hesitation. After they left, the mercenaries opened fire on Carl frantically, but Carl, with all that money, was invincible. He could advance completely unharmed by the bullets.
돈이 좋다는 건 알고 있었지만 이 정도일 줄은 몰랐다.
Now Carl could finally unleash his power without holding back. The mercenaries were beneath his notice, not even worth the ants. He took them down effortlessly. In the end, the only enemies left were Joe Nason and the Hermes woman. The Hermes woman still thought Carl was the same as before, so she pulled out her dagger and attacked frantically using her teleportation ability. Carl mocked her, saying her speed was far too slow. He tossed her aside in disdain, then he walked slowly toward Joe Nason, ready to send him to hell. Unexpectedly, something strange happened to his body. A sudden wave of dizziness washed over him. When Carl regained consciousness, he was already handcuffed in a police car. He didn't understand what was going on. He reached into his pocket and found some money. He tried to use his superpowers to break free, but for some reason, it didn't work at all. Just then, Aaron made a sound from behind him. To everyone's surprise, this time, he didn't take Carl back to the police station. Instead, he used a key to unlock his handcuffs. Carl told Aaron to hurry and arrest Joe Nason, also telling him about the replicated drugs. Aaron told him to go home and stay put, now that he had no superpowers left, saying they had been working on the drug case all along. But everything wasn't as simple as it seemed. On the other side, with Joe Nason's men incapacitated and Carl and the others gone, the young lady ended up reaping all the benefits. After ordering her men to take the essence back to the laboratory, she walked slowly to the vault. Before she could do anything, she saw her bodyguards pointing their guns at her. In reality, these weren't bodyguards at all. They were the loan shark's men. They laughed loudly and welcomed their boss's arrival. As the young lady looked on in shock, the loan shark boss smiled and said, she was the ultimate winner. The young lady didn't understand what she was going to do. The loan shark boss warned her that she would be fine if she stayed put. Then she told her men to smash the wall. What exactly was behind the wall? At the same time, Carl went to find his father to ask what was going on, wondering why his superpowers had disappeared. His father said he had exceeded the limit. There was a cap on using other people's money. Carl's body couldn't handle the backlash from that much power.
그러니까 내가 남의 돈은 손도 대지 말라고 처음부터 얘기를 했잖니.
This was absurd. There was actually a limit to his superpowers. If he only relied on his own money, he didn't stand a chance at all. As he was complaining, his father asked him if he would stand by and do nothing without his superpowers.
엄마한테 받은 돈 3천만 원을 생판 모르는 사람들 구하겠다고 쓸 수 있는 사람은 별로 없어.
His father told Carl earnestly, it wasn't the superpowers that saved the bus passengers, it was Carl himself. The essence of saving lives wasn't money at all. Maybe if he realized this, his superpowers would come back. At this point, the loan shark boss found a box behind the wall. She unlocked it with the key around her neck, and pulled out a ledger from inside. On the other side, Jason took his son to the dock. He pulled out a pistol in disappointment, and pointed it at his son's head. It was impossible not to be scared. Joe Nason turned his head instinctively, but Jason didn't fire. He thought that compared to death, living a miserable life as a useless person was far more terrifying. So he threw a plane ticket on the ground angrily, and turned to leave. But suddenly, the young lady called him. Jason answered the phone, only to find it was the loan shark boss on the line. She held up the ledger in her hand, and demanded that he pay his debts. Jason refused to admit it. The loan shark boss immediately ordered her men to move all the money away. Carl returned home dejectedly to find Lucy, but discovered the house was in complete disarray. He was wondering who had done this, when the phone on the sofa suddenly rang, and it was Joe Nason who was calling. Clearly, he was unwilling to accept defeat. Carl asked to see Lucy, but Joe Nason told him to wait for further notice. Not long after, the Hermes woman arrived at Carl's house, wanting to verify if his superpowers were really gone. The Hermes woman threw a stack of money on the floor, and told Carl to defeat her if he wanted to save Lucy. But Carl was just an ordinary person now. He was pinned to the ground and brutally beaten by her. The Hermes woman took her revenge for all the humiliation she had suffered. Having confirmed that Carl was powerless, she prepared to kill him once and for all. Aaron and Jack arrived just in time to save him, after injecting the Hermes woman with a sedative. She fell into a coma instantly. Then Jack shared his thoughts, thinking that Lucy was probably being held at the Chable family's logistics company. Carl was determined to go save her, even though he knew he might never come back, because Lucy was more important than money in his own life. The next day, Aaron snuck into the logistics company. She instinctively tried to hide when she saw someone approaching, only to find it was Jack. She asked him why he had come to throw his life away. Jack said he was someone who valued loyalty. At the same time, Carl was ready to risk everything to save Lucy. He made a dramatic entrance, with his head covered in blood. Luckily, there were quite a few coins scattered all over him. This meant his superpowers were back. His wounds healed quickly. After standing up slowly, after speaking,
한 놈당 1,000원씩이니까 빨리빨리 할까?
Carl threw punch after punch with all his strength, taking down the guards on that floor in a spectacular fashion. He rushed upstairs in a hurry, only to find far more enemies than he had expected. The problem was that he didn't have much money left. Even 1,001 per person wasn't nearly enough. Just as he was worrying about what to do, Aaron and Jack arrived to help. Carl was about to thank them, when he suddenly heard Lucy's cry for help. So Aaron and Jack stayed behind to take care of the underlings, while Carl went to rescue his wife. When Joe Nason saw him, he fired without hesitation. Seeing that blood was gushing from the wound, he knew Carl had run out of money, and he still had plenty of men left. He persuaded Carl to hand over his superpowers willingly, saying he would let Carl take his wife and go home, otherwise, he would have to collect Lucy's body. As the two sides were locked in a stalemate, Jack suddenly dropped down from the ceiling. After pinning Joe Nason down, he shouted for Aaron to throw the wallet. Unexpectedly, Joe Nason actually shot Jack in the kidney. Then he prepared to go after Lucy next. Carl pushed him into the elevator that had been rigged with explosives. Inside the elevator, Joe Nason still thought he could gain the upper hand. With his pistol,
내 힘은 돈에서 나오는 게 아니야. 마음이지.
The streets of Seoul were thrown into chaos. All these people had taken the superpowered drug. Compared to the earlier side effect of death, the only side effects now were loss of control and physical breakdown. The crowd gathered in front of the Chables companies to demand an explanation. When the Chable refused to admit responsibility, they smashed things in desperation. Aaron watched the news and asked Jack if Joe Nason was dead. Jack gave her an affirmative answer. He sighed helplessly and said the mortal society still existed. So everything was far from over. Aaron felt frustrated. Now that Carl was dead, who else could stop the mortal society? Jack said that successfully saving Lucy was equivalent to preserving Carl's superpowers. After all, if Lucy had died, Carl would never have used his powers again, even if he had kept them. But now Lucy was alive, and the superpowers hadn't fallen into the mortal society's hands. This was already the best possible outcome. Of course, there was another possible ending.
지금까지 움직이지 않던 사람들이 움직이게 될 거야.
At the same time, the young lady learned that Joe Nason was dead. She was in very good mood, but her joy was short-lived. When her bodyguard brought her a file, she discovered there was a mysterious member in the Superpowered Association. His power was to turn back time to any desired moment. The young lady stopped smiling immediately. She had no desire to see Joe Nason come back to life, so she ordered her bodyguard to find this person at once. On the other side, Lucy went back home, thinking about her beloved husband's death. She curled up on the floor, her heart filled with despair. She wished more than anything that it had all been a dream. But this was the harsh reality. As she grieved, Aaron and Jack arrived. Jack said everything wasn't over yet. They needed Lucy to do something, and if she succeeded, she could bring Carl back to life. Then Lucy rushed to a taxi as fast as she could. She arrived at the police station safely, and searched frantically for Aaron, hoping to beg him to turn back time. But before she could find him, she was stopped by the young lady's men. It looked like Lucy was about to be killed. Suddenly, the Hermes woman charged in.
왜? 너만 시간 되돌리고 싶은 거 아니거든? 빨리 가.
With the Hermes woman holding them off, Lucy ran into the office as fast as she could to find Aaron. But Aaron had no intention of helping at all. He said that even if they tried again, it might not work out, and it might even make everything much worse. Lucy continued to plead with him earnestly.
네가 뭔가를 바꾸면 개입한 사람의 남은 시간, 네 수명이 줄어들어.
Lucy said she didn't care about the risks. She just wanted Carl to be alive. Aaron was moved by her sincerity. He put a worn-out watch on Lucy's wrist. He warned her that she could go back to the past and intervene, but she would forget everything that had happened afterward. The next second, the watch hands began to spin backward. Time itself started to turn back. Lucy pried open the elevator door with all her strength, and placed a stack of money in Carl's hand. After a loud explosion, Lucy looked at the rubble on the ground, and broke down in tears. Seeing that Carl was still alive, Lucy told him he was never allowed to do anything this dangerous again. Carl comforted his wife, telling her not to be afraid, but he had no idea why he suddenly had money in his hand. Just then, Aaron rushed over. He was overjoyed to see that Carl was alive, but this time reversal had not only saved Carl, it had also brought Joe Nason back to life. Joe Nason had returned home, and found a bodyguard pointing a gun at him. Joe Nason asked if it was really this hard to return to his own home. Jason was utterly disappointed in him. The young lady might have been incompetent, but at least she still cared about him. But Joe Nason had been foolish enough to try to seize Carl's superpowers for himself. Jason didn't want to say another word, so he left the matter to his daughter. The young lady immediately walked out with her bodyguards, saying she had been waiting for this day for a long time. Just like when they were kids, she resolutely pointed her gun at her brother. The young lady was stunned. The bullet had bounced back and hit her instead. The old man's prophecy had come true. As she wallowed in shock, the Hermes woman used her superpowers to kill all the bodyguards. Joe Nason walked over to his sister with a smile, saying he had been waiting for this day for a long time too. With that, he shot her dead. At this point, Jason was still waiting in his study. He had expected his daughter to come, but instead, the lone shark boss arrived. She knew Jason was in danger.
걱정 마세요. 내 돈 갚기 전에는 안 죽어요.
By the time Joe Nason arrived, the study was already empty, and Joe Nason's physical condition was already deteriorating rapidly. To save him, the Hermes woman immediately took him to the laboratory. Joe Nason demanded that he be injected with all the superpower essence. He refused to believe he couldn't capture Carl. After all the essence had been injected into him, the Hermes woman asked anxiously how he was feeling. Joe Nason gently stroked her face. Sometime later, Carl and the other two entered the laboratory. As soon as they walked in, they saw bodies everywhere. They had no idea what had happened. As they went further inside, they found the Hermes woman dead, and the floor was covered with empty vials. They could guess what had happened. On the other side, Joe Nason was using his superpowers to kill people indiscriminately on the street. The crowd fled in terror. In the chaos, a child got separated from his mother. When Joe Nason saw Carl arrive, he excitedly showed off his newly acquired superpowers, complaining that he should have gotten such a powerful ability sooner. With that, the two of them began to fight using their superpowers. When Joe Nason realized he couldn't win, he exploited Carl's kindness to gain the upper hand, draining Carl of all his money in the process. Even Aaron and the loan shark boss, who had come to help, were no match for him. Joe Nason brutally tormented Carl, mocking him for thinking his kindness would get him anywhere. But just then, the child Carl had saved earlier threw his piggy bank at him.
아저씨, 이길 수 있어요.
Inspired by the child, everyone else began throwing money out the windows too. What's more, Aaron got her hands on some bread, and Aaron brought Jack some alcohol. With the crowd cheering them on, Carl and the other two launched their final attack. They finally succeeded in putting an end to it all. Jason's ill-gotten wealth was exposed, and the loan shark boss turned him over to the authorities. It was certain that justice would be served, and everyone else went back to living normal lives. Aaron found the rescued Helen. Jack spent his remaining days with his family. Carl and Lucy finally moved into their own house, and the interesting news was that Carl was going to be a father. This marked the end of the series. It feels like some of the settings in the show were never fully explained. All superpowers require a price, so what price do powers like pyrokinesis, electrokinesis, and teleportation come with? It seemed like Joe Nason and the Hermes woman had no concerns about the cost when they fought. What are your thoughts on this? If you enjoyed my channel, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.